Disclaimer. The following content is for informational purposes only. You should not construe any such information or other material as legal, tax, investment, financial, or other advice. Nothing contained in this presentation constitutes a solicitation, recommendation, endorsement, or offer by BTC Media, the Let's Talk Bitcoin Network, or any third-party service provider to buy or sell any securities or other financial instruments.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Bitcoin Magazine podcast. I'm Dave.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Bitcoin Magazine podcast. I'm Dave as well.
Well, anyway, today we've got some news and an interview with Robert Allen, executive producer of the animated series Bitcoin and Friends.
For those of you who haven't seen it, Bitcoin and Friends is dark, it's very cartoonish, and sometimes sick, but hilariously satirical. I absolutely loved it. But before we get into that interview, here's what's going on in the Bitcoin world.
The last few days seem to have been a turning point for the Bitcoin industry and how it will wrestle with the increasing regulatory pressure around the world. In June, the G7's Financial Action Task Force released recommendations that cryptocurrency service providers implement stricter KYC measures to track transactions and better combat criminal activity. These have been likened to cryptocurrency equivalents of the Travel Rule, a U.S. Bank Secrecy Act that requires reporting about fund transfers. In response, the FATF recommendation, digital ID firm Netki has introduced a retooled version of its TransactID that allows crypto companies to comply with the rule while maintaining some level of user privacy. Similarly, blockchain security provider CipherTrace has introduced its Travel Rule information sharing architecture, its own reference implementation for complying with rules in privacy-preserving ways. As Bitcoin continues to grow and regulatory scrutiny increases, service providers will definitely be looking for ways to comply while maintaining the private and secure ethos of the technology. And this is proof that the sector can self-regulate.
Well, if you've been out of the Bitcoin game for the past couple months, the one thing you need to know is that Bitcoin is growing. Amid a price rally that began in April, Bitcoin's hash rate has been rising steadily, an indicator that more miners are participating in the network and at a more efficient pace. When Bitmain, a major Bitcoin miner manufacturer, launched 2 new versions of its popular Antminer 17 product recently, the inventory was snatched up within minutes. The Antminer S17E and the T17E offered some significant upgrades to previous models, and their activation in the space may drive the hash rate up even further.
While network and regulatory compliance growth are critical to Bitcoin, a recent interview with the NFL's Russell Okung emphasized how vital evangelism and messaging is to adoption as well. Speaking with Bitcoin Magazine's Colin Harper, the Los Angeles Chargers Pro Bowl left tackle described his own journey in discovering the power of Bitcoin and its efforts to get it added to the payment option for NFL players. Okung plugged his recent conference, Bitcoin Is, and stressed the need for the Bitcoin community to reach out to those who haven't adopted the technology with messages that will resonate. We talk a lot about mass adoption, but what does that really mean? Okung asked. If I could challenge people in this industry, it would be getting creative about how to get people involved.
The animated web series Bitcoin and Friends launched this spring, specifically in March, and up to date, it's released 3 episodes, and today we're joined by its co-creator, Robert Allen.
Real quick, if you guys haven't seen Bitcoin and Friends yet, just pause the episode and check it out on YouTube or the website. There will be some slight spoilers ahead.
Ooh, spoilers. Moving forward, should we call you Robert, Rob, or Broccoli Rob?
I guess the adult name that I've gravitated towards is Robert, but for the show, we thought it would be fun to just throw some silly names together. So,
nice.
Whatever you guys want, really. I'm pretty calm about it.
Okay. All right. I'll probably go back in and out of different names throughout it. But okay, I mean, that's a good start. Can you just sort of explain to our audience what Bitcoin and Friends is?
Yeah, so Bitcoin Friends is a series, a cartoon that is geared towards adults, and it chronicles the story and the life of Bitcoin, where Bitcoin is sort of a personification of the network. That's the idea, and so we're starting first episode when, of course, when Bitcoin is created is a good place to start. So we have Satoshi with Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is on sort of an operating table.
Right.
Is brought to life, and then immediately starts puking up block rewards, which is kind of our way of explaining how the currency is issued, and trying to differentiate between the network and the currency. And and so then Satoshi leaves, and Bitcoin has this existential crisis, trying to figure out why he was created and why his father has abandoned him.
It doesn't really end.
So on. Yeah, it doesn't end, you said? Yeah, no, the crisis is still going.
So, I mean, it's incredibly dark. I love it. Within the first 2 minutes, there are, and maybe less, there are 2 suicides. What were you sort of going for there?
Well, I think we were trying to capture the crisis in the United States in terms of the economy and the crash in 2007 and 8. So we wanted to show the despair and the misery that a lot of people were living through. Of course, really not a whole lot has changed for a lot of Americans in that the 10 years roughly since then. In spite of the current administration, crowing about how amazing everything is, there's still a lot of struggling people. Out here in California, in Los Angeles, you have just droves of people living on the streets in tents, and we're in the middle of a pretty significant, decade-long depression, in my opinion. But the media is pretty good at trying to shape the narrative to distract people from that fact. And of course, the government and every administration that is in office, regardless of left or right, is going to paint with the rosiest brush that they can, try to convince everyone that everything is great. But yeah, so we wanted to show that the struggle that is very real for many people, and do it in a comedy to me is really about putting harsh truths in front of people in such a way that in one way it is funny, but in another way it's terrifying. And you kind of have to, I think, thread that needle to make good comedy. It needs to really be a little bit shocking. So that's glad that we did that for you.
Yeah, there's always an underlying truth to comedy, and
right.
You guys definitely went the exact opposite route.
Yeah,
I like that.
And like, I guess it'd be oversimplifying it to call it a satire.
I think there's definitely a lot that is satirical, and that's a type of comedy that I really enjoy, and I think Chris, the writer director, as well. So I think that comes out in it. But we also grew up watching shows like Monty Python. So there's some of that more absurd kind of comedy that's mixed in there as well, here and there. So I hopefully people see there's a lot of referencing of different genres and types of comedy, and we try to play a lot with what we're presenting there to keep it hopefully interesting and fresh.
Right. Now that you say that, there's all sorts of pop culture references scattered throughout. I love the Men in Black reference in episode 3.
Yeah.
Sugar, water. Yeah. Sugar, water.
Yeah.
More.
Exactly.
Has anybody brought up Sick Animation to you yet?
Sick Animation.
Sick Animation. It was a cartoon internet series back in the early days, not early days of the internet, but 2005, 2006. And there were a lot of similarities to that. You remember E-Bombs World? E-Bombs World featured a lot of their videos.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. I got a lot of Sick Animation vibes in this.
Oh, cool.
I was wondering if anybody brought that up to you yet.
No, actually, you're the first, and I don't believe, I've never seen their comedy, and I don't think Chris has either. So that's kind of new to us. Although I wonder, they're just looking now online, the art style does remind me a little bit of some of the stuff that Bird has done. Birdie and Torres, our chief or lead artist, I should say.
Right.
Similar kind of style a little bit, but yeah, we'll definitely have to take a look at that. That's interesting.
Right. So I mean, speaking of your artist, can we kind of just go back to like where this whole idea kind of gestated and where you guys sort of narrowed down your artistic style and the voices and all that? Like,
Yeah,
did it start with one person, or was it kind of like a group tank thing?
Well, so I think the very first germ of the idea was Chris and I were actually thinking about producing an advertisement that would have been like sort of an AA meeting with a bunch of different actors in these big coin kind of plush costumes, if you will. So you can imagine all these coins sitting around talking about their troubles in crypto land. And that was something that we were in the middle of developing, and then we ended up just kind of axing it. But that was, I think, the start of this idea of sort of personifying these networks as characters. And then maybe 6 months or so after that, that project was abandoned. Chris, talked to me about the idea of taking, kind of a cartoon approach. And, he had the idea of Bitcoin as, the network, and then Bitcoin puking up the block reward and a bunch of other ideas. And then, so Chris really had the gist of it already kind of down in his mind. And then I started working with him on fleshing out the direction of the show and other characters to include, and so on and so forth. And, it was apparent to me very quickly that, the idea was compelling and fun, and B, that there's so much rich content in, historical, good, interesting content in crypto, in the history of Bitcoin, that we felt like, wow, this is just a huge opportunity. And it's kind of surprising that no one's actually tried to do something like this already. And so then I was sold from then on, and we started working, outlining things. I'd been traveling, living for quite a bit of time in Mexico, on and off, and doing a lot of traveling. So anyway, we were kind of working remote on it. And then last fall, I went out to Utah, where Chris was living at that point, and we worked for a few months on getting episode 1, kind of further ironed out, and then we started working on finding animators. And Birdie was a friend of Chris's from before, and so that worked out really well because we already knew him, and we knew he was a talented artist. And so that was, that's where Chris and he worked on the characters and the design, which of course has morphed a little bit. Like Bitcoin in the first episode looks a little different than he does now in episodes 2 and 3. So we're still kind of refining things, and ideally we'd love for the show to get picked up at some point by a network, to where we would have a little more budget, and we would probably go back and actually revise the first few episodes, because we're happy, given the budget and where we've come from with it, we're happy with how things look. But of course, as any artist will feel, there's always room for improvement.
Right.
So I'd like to to brush things up a bit. Still, it's still early days for the show. There's been a lot of ups and downs, quite frankly. We've gotten sponsors, but here we are right now waiting on sponsorship for episode 4. So hopefully we've got some interest, and we're talking to some people, but until someone ponies up the money, we may be waiting. And we already invested a significant amount, around $40,000 in episode 1. So we feel like, on our end, we need to, be a little prudent and cautious, and make sure that we don't keep dumping money into something if there isn't a business model that's working. But so far it seems like the sponsorship route is going to work, and we've been able to get funding for episodes 2 and 3 that way. And of course, the idea being that we're bringing eyeballs to sponsors, and they're helping us to create the content through their sponsorship funds. So So that's the approach that we're taking now. But again, longer term, the hope is that we can secure, a network spot in some capacity with maybe Adult Swim or Netflix or something like that.
Yeah, there's definitely an Adult Swim vibe there.
Yeah.
What's your process for reaching out to sponsors? We've seen like your donation page on the website. It's very cool that you guys have set that up. I also checked out your marketing deck too. And that is really robust and just like very clear and like simple to understand.
So, well, we have actually been fairly lucky in that, most of the sponsors, well, all the sponsors that have given us money, except for one, actually approached us. And so, so that's also been just very encouraging to see that there's enough interest out there that we haven't had to knock on too many doors ourselves. But Christian, who's done some marketing, one of the guys on the team, did reach out, I believe, to Celsius Network and, brought them on board, and that was really excellent. So, yeah, we may have to start knocking on more doors now as things are a little bit more up in the air for this next episode. We might have to start pushing a little bit more. But yeah, generally, the website, we're actually having that redesigned right now, and we had a company come forward and offer to do that for us. So we're really excited. Their design looks, quite a bit better than what we currently have. So that's exciting. And this is a big endeavor. There's a lot that's going on, obviously, to keep it all running. But thankfully, we've had a lot of people step up and offer to help us in different ways. And so we're hopeful. We'll just keep pushing ahead, and a day at a time, and we'll make this thing successful, I hope.
Right. And you're planning to do, this is an 8-part series, correct?
Yeah. So season 1 is 8 episodes. That's what we have planned. And we actually have the story arc, and quite a bit of the writing done for 3 seasons. And so,
oh, wow.
That's what we're hoping at the, kind of bare minimum. That's what we'd love to be able to do because, we've got a story that we want to tell, and it's going to take us some time. And of course, unless Bitcoin and crypto somehow die tomorrow, which I highly doubt will happen, it's possible that we could continue to produce the show for many years to come if there's enough of an audience and we can make it work financially speaking. So, yeah, I mean, for me and Chris, I think, we've been investing and following and working to some capacity in this space since 2014. It's been, a real passion of mine, and it's just exciting to try to put something out there to help push this story forward, and hopefully to connect with people who are maybe not as crypto savvy. That's our goal. So of course the show has a lot of kind of little hidden Easter eggs and fun things for crypto people, but our hope is that it'll eventually have a broader appeal, and we can start to actually just entertain and then bring people in to Bitcoin through the show. And so that's really the goal.
We do want to talk about some of the characters in the show, but before we do that, you said you had 3 seasons lined up in your head, or maybe on paper. Where are you at in the timeline of everything going on through season 3, without giving away too much, obviously?
Yeah. So through season 3, I think we would be getting through the 2017 bubble, or whatever you want to call that, but the mania phase there.
The ICOs.
Yeah, the ICOs. Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
Definitely be able to hit on the ICOs. But of course, some of that's there's some flexibility there, in the sense that depending on how the first season goes and funding, maybe we only have funding for 2 seasons, or who knows. So I mean, I think we're going to be flexible to the point of trying to get the story told, but ideally 3 seasons would give us enough space to really jump into all the different things we want to discuss and bring to the table.
And speaking of your characters, I gotta say one of my favorites is, it's not Vitalik, it's Metallic, right?
Right.
So there's sort of a duality with him where, on one hand, he's this nerd or like the whitest person on earth.
Sure.
But on the other hand, he's kind of a big proponent of Bitcoin and is sort of the first person to figure out what B is. What was your approach when writing that character? Like, what are you trying to convey with who this person is?
So Metallic, as you point out, is technically minded and is the first person in that group to figure out what's going on with Bitcoin. Now, there's so much within the history of Bitcoin in terms of hundreds and hundreds of people contributing code and running servers and everything. So it's hard to, in other words, like we're trying to boil down sort of an archetype of a type of person and project that through one character. And so in some ways he's an amalgamation of maybe a few people or a lot of people, but in general, we want him to also, we're obviously sticking to some of the history of Vitalik in the sense that, he was early on, well, he was involved with Bitcoin Magazine, right? So he's been in the space for a long time, and he was primarily interested initially in Bitcoin, and then my understanding is he wanted to, had some ideas for adding additional functionality to Bitcoin or additional, kind of layer 2 type ideas, and got some sort of kickback from the community from the other developers, some pushback. And then he decided, kind of got discouraged and decided to move on to Ethereum. And so that, you see that in the first few episodes there where he's very excited and he tells Bitcoin that Bitcoin will be able to do all these other things aside from just being money. And he's very excited about it. And then Bitcoin just kind of leaves him. And so, so we want to show, a character who's excited about Bitcoin, but also has his own ideas. And then he kind of, hits this sort of impasse. But, we'll see obviously as the season goes. I'm sure, it's not to say that his relationship with Bitcoin is over by any stretch, but, he's kind of got his own journey to take, and Ethereum obviously being a big part of that. And regardless of what people think about Ethereum, it has been a project that has made a lot of waves and is still number 2 in market cap, or usually at number 2, I should say. But so I think it's an important piece of the story that we wanted to tell, and he's the kind of character to help us do that.
Yeah, some of the references I got immediately, like in the Harold, he's sort of kind of like, to me at least, seemed like the bearish Bitcoin supporter, like the guy who's always sort of a naysayer, but he's still kind of going along with it. And then obviously Ross being a libertarian in episode 3. But some of the stuff went over my head. And I know, like, when you're doing something like this artistically, it doesn't have to fit neatly in like, oh, I chose to make this character to symbolize this. But I was curious about generally your take on like the character design, and then also some specific things like Litecoin coming from aliens, and Bitcoin just at the end of episode 3, just basically just getting in with the rich crowd and like losing his way and all that stuff.
Right.
Yeah. So, I'd be curious to hear some of the things that you didn't understand, or some of the stuff you felt was over your head. That'd be interesting. So perhaps after this, but Harold was definitely supposed to be a cautionary tale. So he's, the guy that is generally skeptical, a little bit late to the technology in some ways, and then tends to just make a lot of bad decisions. And so later on in the show, he's going to get into ICOs and start pumping. He's going to have his own YouTube channel where he shills a lot of stuff, and so it'll be fun. He's a really fun character, and I'm real happy with the voice actor we have voicing him is doing a great job too. So kind of again an amalgamation of people in a sense, or but generally speaking, kind of pushing in that direction of being a cautionary tale is what we're doing with him. And then Litecoin and the whole alien thing. that was Chris, and I think a really good idea, and a way to obviously kind of pay homage to Men in Black and kind of pull in some pop culture references. But ultimately, the idea there is that Bitcoin, and this, well, and maybe this is more my opinion than Chris's, but I think first and foremost, as a community, that we need to be united in building a sound monetary system, because that to me is the main innovation that Bitcoin is offering. It's not so much about fast payments or some new payment system, although of course I think that's going to be part of it. But the idea that we can have a money that is separated and divorced from government, the separation of money and state, that idea is, I think, really what is most important about Bitcoin. And so, there's a danger with projects like Litecoin, where people can get sort of sucked into, well, I'm just going to, I missed the boat on Bitcoin, so I'm going to get into this other thing. And, I can only buy point whatever Bitcoin, but I can buy 50 of this, this new coin. And so there are a lot of ways where I think people can get tricked into investing in projects that have probably very, very little chance of success because of network effects and first mover advantage. And so, Litecoin is kind of a project in my mind that's a lot like that, where it doesn't really have a lot to offer aside, in terms of anything new or different from Bitcoin. So its reason to exist is kind of questionable. And but in the show, it's going to be fun because Litecoin is going to kind of be like the like a crash test dummy for Bitcoin, and so they're going to, and that's maybe arguably the one redeeming quality of Litecoin, is that they've used it to try to test out some different upgrades like SegWit and so on. So we'll be able to kind of play around with that, where Litecoin is going to kind of get abused a little bit in a playful way. As he's helping Bitcoin to succeed. And I guess, to temper all that, I will also say that I do think that it's important, of course, for people to have the freedom to try different things and to try different technologies. And so, and I do think there's some benefit in having, more than one protocol that's existing and being worked on. But do we need 1,000 of these projects? I don't know. It seems
no.
like things have gotten a little crazy. And so, so we're trying to kind of thread the needle there too, because I would say we're huge proponents of Bitcoin. I don't know if we're quite as far as some of the Bitcoin maximalists would go, but we're probably leaning in that direction. And, so we're trying to, to have fun, to show the evolution of the space, but to not lose focus on Bitcoin.
Right.
And so that's kind of that. And the alien part, I mean, that's more just for fun, but I like this idea of Bitcoin potentially leading to, a more advanced civilization for humans. The idea that, if we can coordinate the economy more efficiently and with less fraud and less theft through government money printing and coercion, then theoretically we're going to all be much wealthier because our resources will be used more efficiently, and that's good for everyone. And so Bitcoin does, I believe, have the potential to really push humanity forward pretty dramatically, similar to kind of the difference between pre and post industrial revolution. And so if that's the case, and kind of playing with that idea, if aliens didn't want us to advance for some reason, then maybe they would try to muddle and confuse and distract and keep us from embracing this new paradigm. And so that's kind of the idea.
We're going to take a quick break. We will be right back. So, Dave, you still living on the darknet?
Yep, all day, every day.
Do you really need that much privacy, bro?
Graham, arguing that you don't care about the right to privacy because you have nothing to hide is the same as saying you don't care about free speech because you have nothing to say.
Okay, I guess that's true.
I'm telling you, man, too many spam emails, targeted ads. I just can't take it anymore.
Well, easy, Dave. Haven cares about your privacy. Have you downloaded it yet?
Oh yeah, I have. I've even sold a few things.
Like what?
That's private.
Okay. Well, for those of you who don't know, Haven is the world's first privacy-focused shopping app for iOS and Android devices. You can shop and chat with other users under the warm security blanket of end-to-end encryption.
And you can buy and sell stuff using popular cryptocurrencies like Litecoin, Zcash, and even Bitcoin if you want to. I'm a hodler. I wouldn't do it.
I don't blame you, Dave. Tell us how the privacy works again.
All your crypto data about your transactions, messages, and all your sensitive information is stored locally on your device.
So, in other words, it's completely under your control.
Yep, Haven uses advanced technology to keep your information private while being simple to use. You don't need to know how end-to-end encryption works or understand decentralization. You just need to know it works for you on Haven.
Well, that's great. It also says that all communication is peer-to-peer and end-to-end encrypted. There's no middleman. And you know how I feel about middlemen, Dave.
I can't stand them either, Graham.
Their time will come. Their time will come.
If you care about your privacy, check out Haven today.
Go to gethaven.app/BitcoinMagPod to get $5 in free crypto today.
Again, that's gethaven.app/BitcoinMagPod.
That's a lot of spelling, Dave. Boom. Privacy engaged.
To the moon!
Woo!
Going back to some of like the references in episode, I think it was episode 2, where Bitcoin goes to a libertarian festival and then winds up in a fight with the U.S. dollar and gold.
Right.
Is that was there any sort of commentary on like Bitcoin maximalism or maybe Freedom Fest, since you did say that you've been to it?
Yeah, I think for sure the sort of inspiration for some of that was my experience in 2011 at Freedom Fest. And overall, we have a lot of love for libertarianism. I would consider myself to be in that category. But it's also just fun to poke a little bit of fun at people. So,
Yeah.
regardless of your ideology, people are just strange and, get pulled into, well, I mean, I guess what I'll say is, put simply, free thinking people tend to be very free in many different ways. And sometimes, they'll gravitate towards ideas that, especially in the mainstream, are going to be very, very odd. Like we have a guy selling his wife's breast milk, and so just kind of taking stuff that would be, maybe a little more fringy, like there's the whole unpasteurized milk movement, which is fine. I mean, I don't buy unpasteurized milk myself, but I mean, I know people swear by it, or at least the people that are in that category. So, it's just stuff like that where people get kind of far out on a limb in some respects, and it can be kind of fun to just poke a little bit. Yeah, that's all we're doing there. Hopefully we don't offend anyone too much.
I think you guys take a good Southpark, Rick and Morty approach where to not offend anyone, you offend everyone.
Yeah.
And I think that's the best way to go.
Right.
To, if you're really trying to put out ideas out there, and because most ideas you can criticize in some way.
Sure.
There's not really a lot of that in this space, actually, at least that comes from this space as far as media goes, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And our hope is that in laughing at ourselves, we can lighten up a bit, and because things were definitely, and still are to some degree, but I mean, I feel like maybe a year ago it was at its worst. It's when the price is crashing and people are really, really pissed, and it just starts to get nasty on Twitter and other places. And, so yeah, our hope is that people can have a little bit of a pressure release valve in the show, and, and have some fun laughing at themselves.
Right. I mean, I've got to be honest. The whole thing was a breath of fresh air to me. Specifically, I'm just thinking about the battlefield that I call crypto Twitter.
Mm.
What was your approach? Like, did it have anything to do with sort of the volatility of the community?
In terms of which aspect?
Of just, like taking this approach that's just, very raw, sometimes absurd. Everybody can laugh at themselves. Like, was there any time in the development of this that you're like, listen, we need to stop fighting each other. Let's just make something funny.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big part of what motivated the show for Chris and I. Again, we've both been kind of more on the sidelines in terms of, like, I have a Twitter account. I mostly just retweet, or like things. Like I tend to not, to not engage too much there.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
Yeah, mostly just because I don't know. I've never really. I've never been the kind of person who likes to go out there and make a big scene. Like, I'd rather just work on projects that I'm interested in. I do see, as time goes by, there definitely are benefits in having a Twitter following and engaging in that way. Monetarily, for a lot of people, it can pay off. And obviously for the show, we're trying to do our best to get the word out through social media. And we have, I think, 3,000 and change followers for our show now on Twitter, which is nice. So, I see the utility, but for sure we were both just kind of a little discouraged by some of the vitriol and negativity. And I think there's, of course, from the Bitcoin maximalist side, I do see the argument of saying, hey, you know what, we need to stand up and call out scams when we see them. And not be afraid to say things that are unpopular or that might be divisive if it's in the interest of truth, in the interest of maybe discouraging people from getting burned. So I can see that, but at the same time, I also see I tend to come from the perspective, which is basically that markets need to be free, and there needs to be a lot of competition there for the best outcome. And so, I don't think we would be in a better place if it was just Bitcoin only. I think it would actually be, quite a bit more dangerous in the sense that governments would have just one single target. So I don't know. I think my thinking is still evolving with a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, that's an interesting take, though. To say that, if there weren't other ones like Litecoin, for example, as you mentioned earlier, it'd be a little bit more difficult, maybe.
Yeah, and I think I grew up in a fairly conservative, almost fundamentalist kind of Christian home, and I think I've seen, and this happens in many places and many ideologies, but there's definitely some danger when you start to get into a place where you've got an echo chamber and you're only hearing what you want to hear.
Right.
And, you're only reinforcing your ideas. And so I see a little bit of that in the maximalist side. I see that in other places as well. So I think it's important to put your ideas out there, but also to be humble enough to realize that, hey, you could be wrong. A bit, as much as I'm very, very excited and bullish on Bitcoin, I don't know the future. I can't predict what's going to happen. And so I think some humility is in order, I think, sometimes with certain personalities. And so, but poking and laughing and, bringing a bit of that court jester aspect to the space, I think, will be helpful for everyone.
So wait, where are you from, and what denomination was your family?
Well, my dad was, and my grandfather, actually, we'll go back to my grandfather. My grandfather was a Christian and Missionary Alliance pastor in Ohio. That's where I was born.
Okay.
And he started a bunch of churches and, knew Billy Graham and so on and so forth. And then my dad worked for CNMA for a while before I was born. And he got out of Christian ministry and was actually a financial advisor and did he had a Series 6, so he sold mutual funds, annuities, and
Okay.
stuff like that. Yeah.
So the religious background, is that why you're so sick? I'm kidding.
To add to that, what Graham's saying, my dad's a priest, so
Okay.
so I think what he means is like, are you, there's like a stereotype about
You bottled up for so long,
yeah,
and then you create Bitcoin and friends.
Feel free to tell Graham to fuck off, by the way.
Yes, please do.
No, that's cool. I trust me, I'm not easily offended. That was funny. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. My journey in terms of my ideas of spirituality is still in process. And I think like a lot of people who grew up in the church and left it, because I definitely did for quite a while. And I still don't attend church in any sort of regularity. But I went through kind of a very angry atheist phase. I was actually very involved in churches when I was in high school and early college. I used to lead singing and devotional groups and Bible studies, and I was very, very committed for a period of my life. And then I think for me, I moved out of Ohio to New York after college. And I think that was really the beginning of the end of a lot of that thinking, which, maybe was simply just a matter of putting me in a different environment was enough to do it. But, I'd had a lot of what do you want to say, doubts. And I think you could put me in the doubting Thomas category in terms of, where I was just even from a young age, I was always thinking like, well, this doesn't quite make sense, or I don't understand why this literal interpretation needs to be, the only interpretation and that sort of thing.
Right.
And so I would say the religion that I grew up with was very legalistic in the sense that there was, a very prescribed way of living. But, in hindsight and seeing it now, I see a lot of it being very arbitrary. But, it's interesting though, too, because I went through a very, like I said, a kind of very dark atheist phase where I would definitely say that I was probably the most kind of angry that I'd ever been in my life during that period. Mm-hmm. And I think it was really because I had attached myself to rationalism so strongly that it was very easy for me then to judge anyone that did not subscribe to my very literal rationalistic view of the world as just being an idiot. And so then I just was walking around thinking that most of the people I talked to were just total idiots. And that that's a very unhealthy way to live, because it's probably a good way to get cancer or something, if you're
it's obvious that going through all of that has made you a funnier person, and like the whole existential dread that Bitcoin faces throughout these episodes is freaking hilarious. I mean, like it's
sort of like a religion too. And,
yeah.
And you're right. A lot of the most funny people were like so suppressed that they just exploded. And then suddenly like they have this crazy flipped viewpoint of the world because they can actually associate with that suppression.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm not laughing at you during that. I'm laughing because I went through a very similar thing in my life. I was raised Lutheran, which is, I just call it lazy Catholicism.
Yeah.
Catholics.
Guilty Catholic. So no, I thought that was interesting. Some of the funniest people I know are like hardcore Catholics or Lutherans, a couple of Baptists here and there.
Sure.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, there's no doubt that upbringing for sure shaped, Chris and I quite a bit. And I think you could probably see some pieces of that. Actually, back to one of your other questions about, Bitcoin kind of going through this hedonistic phase where, he's buying friends, feels a little bit like, sort of a prodigal son kind of thing.
Right.
And that's, I think, of course, on one level, we're kind of echoing some of the history of Bitcoin with the early, dark market usage and so on. But of course, it's also fun to just bring a character into a situation where, and I mean, I think bottom line is a lot of people, most people, I should say, have probably had experiences where, where they felt let down by people that they thought were their friend for whatever reason. And, so in a bigger sense, we're really trying to make Bitcoin into a character that is relatable to people. And so part of that is that he's struggling, to find his way, and he gets let down quite often by different people. And like a young child, he's naive and innocent, and he can't lie because he's a immutable public ledger. And so it's going to be fun to keep playing with that. I do think there's going to be a progression where he's going to wise up in some ways and mature, but we also don't want to lose some of that innocence, because I think it's like Jesus said, if you want to come to me, you have to be like a child. And I think that's while I'm not a Bible believing Christian, I find myself thinking a lot about scriptures and ideas from the Bible. Anyway, it'll be.
I think the general the way that it was created, it was supposed to be for wisdom, and it just got bastardized over hundreds and thousands of years. But
Right.
Anyway, I digress.
Yeah.
Changing tacks a little bit. So Chris, you keep mentioning Chris. He's your co-creator, from what I understand, and on the credits, he's Uncle Chris.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit more about Chris, and then also y'all's writing process together for the episodes?
Right.
Sure. So, Chris is my brother. I think I mentioned that before.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he's my younger brother. We, it's easy to work together in many respects because, our brains are pretty similar. We have the same family history, same experiences to some degree. So I think that helps a lot in terms of the writing and the fact that we have a similar sense of humor, and so on. So it's really definitely been a lot of fun and fairly easy to work on the project with him. And I think part of that is because we're brothers. But Chris started. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I think he really was made to produce, to write, to create this show. His life journey really was a lot of things that set him up for it. So, for example, he was really into comics growing up when he was in elementary school, and he had like all of the Calvin and Hobbes. He had tons and tons of Calvin and Hobbes books and other comics, and so he would create his own comic strips, and was very diligent and prolific in doing that. Then he started getting into writing screenplays when he was, I think, junior year of high school, actually, and has been writing and producing independent films since then.
Cool.
And and like for most people, it's been a journey, and I've seen him grow as a writer and director and creator over that period of time. And he's really starting to, I think, to come into his own in terms of kind of the perfect storm of different past experiences, and obviously his interest in Bitcoin and all this stuff culminating in this show. So yeah, it's interesting where there are a lot of examples, I think, where we don't realize the journey that's required for someone to get to the point where they are successful. We just see the success, and we don't see all the struggle along the way. So it's fun to be in a position where I can see his diligence paying off. But I've seen him working and struggling for years, and it's really tough to make it in entertainment because it's a really bloated market. There's just tons of stuff out there. And of course, we're still early stages with this project, so who knows? I mean, we may not even finish the first season. I surely hope that we do.
Right.
But,
Well, I actually come from a background in film and television. I was out in LA for a number of years.
Okay, cool.
So I can totally relate. And I can tell just watching this series that there is a lot of love and production value put into it.
Thank you.
How big is the team? I tried to watch I tried to like take mental note of all the credits, but I couldn't really tell if it was like in-house or if you're like outsourcing work. Can you kind of like walk us through what your pre-production to like completion looks like?
Yeah. So, so the core team, I would say, is Chris and I and Jake, Jumper Jake in the credits, who's
Okay.
done production work and also voices, Metallic, the grandpa from the first episode, and then also the grandfather, who is the Don Cornhole as we call him, but yeah, and then a few other characters as well. So he's done quite a bit of the voicing. Chris does Bitcoin and a bunch of other voices,
Okay.
and then Birdie and Torres, who's our lead artist. And has helped, with creating the characters and the feel of the animation and so on. So that's the core team. And in terms of the process, and then we have animators and illustrators that we've been paying to bring this thing to life for us. But I'll get to those in a second. So yeah, so obviously writing the script is first, and well, before that is really the story. And so Chris and I have been outlining and working on story outline for a while now, and obviously that can change and be massaged as we go. But we've got the big arc there for the first 3 seasons in place. So then from the story outline, Chris will write the first draft of the script, and then typically I'll come in. We also have another guy, a friend of ours, Zach Amundsen, who's also been starting to get involved in writing. So at that point, we're putting input and feedback into the script, and then occasionally I've done like episode 2, I did some writing in there. Some of the speeches from Ross I wrote. So so I contribute where I need to. I also have helped a bit with some of the technical stuff and making sure that we're fairly accurate and true to the technology and how it works, and some of the lingo and jargon and so on. And so then once the script is in place, then Chris creates an animatic, which is basically, he creates storyboards and then puts those into an animatic. But basically it's storyboards with voicing and music and sound effects on top of that. And so from there, we're able to get a pretty good idea of, kind of the timing of jokes and the timing of scenes and the flow of everything. And that obviously gets worked on and reworked several times until we're happy with the animatic. And then from there, we give that to, I should back up. So then Bird is creating the puppets. So we're using Character Animator, which is an Adobe program. We're starting to use that more. We also use Adobe Animate, which used to be Flash.
Right.
So Flash animation or Adobe Animate animation is very, very slow. It's frame by frame animation. And so we've had a team of guys, most of them are in the Philippines, that have been doing the animation for us. We've got some really talented guys involved there. And then we also have 2 main illustrators that are doing our backgrounds for all of the different scenes. And so typically the backgrounds are done quite a bit ahead, of course, of the animation. And so then basically give the backgrounds, the animatic, and the different assets and puppets and so on to the animators, and then they're going to go ahead and put that all together. And that's the final step with animation. And then finally, of course, we do some audio mixing, which I've done Chris and I have done a lot of that, I should say, not all of it. We've also hired some help here and there. But yeah, so I think that's pretty much the flow.
Sounds like a classic independent production.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of work, and it's definitely been a labor of love, and we're not making money yet on it, but we're hopeful that it'll get to the point where it can be, our full-time only gig, and we don't have to worry about where we're getting paid.
Right.
So.
Well, I think you guys are off to a great start.
Robert, thanks for coming on the show. It's we love what you guys are doing, and we want to see more episodes of Bitcoin and Friends. And just for our listeners, could you sort of explain the best way they could donate to the project?
Sure. Yeah. So if they go to btcandfriends.com, then there's a link there to donate. And obviously we'll accept a bunch of different types of crypto there. And it's fairly straightforward. We're actually going to be launching a Patreon page as well in the next month, I would say. Otherwise, I mean, really the biggest way that people can help, honestly, even more than money, is to retweet, to share links, to get people watching the show, and to get the word out. So if you go to Twitter, it's BTC and Friends. We're on Facebook, I believe, with the same handle. So yeah, and obviously YouTube, it's youtube.com/Bitcoin and Friends. So if you can just, anyone listening, if you like the show, or even if you don't like it, but, get the word out. But no, I hope you do. So and thank you, David. Thank you, Graham. Really pleasure chatting with both of you.
Thanks so much, Rob. Really appreciate it.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
All right. Take care.
Take care.
Bye.
Special thanks to Robert Allen for coming on at the show. You can check out Bitcoin and Friends on their webpage. That is www.btcandfriends.com. And you can check them out over at YouTube at youtube.com/Bitcoin and Friends. Or just do a little simple search like every other American does. The Bitcoin Magazine podcast is a BTC Media produced podcast on the Let's Talk Bitcoin network. You can find us over on Twitter at Bitcoin Magazine. And you can find other engaging shows over at letstalkbitcoin.com. Thanks for tuning in, guys. We will see you next time.